Good day, class. This is your professor, and we have missed a couple classes there, intentional and unintentional at the same time. Well, we're going to be covering lesson 9, and so let's get into that lesson. Hope that you guys have been looking about your final paper and working arduously on that situation. And, as we're coming to the close of the semester, we are mindful of, our time and making sure that everything is up to date. All right. All right. All right, so we are on lesson 9. And lesson 9 introduces us to the literature of the Old Testament and shows us how the entire literature is being put together. So in lesson 9 here, we are going to be looking at Hebrew poetry, the Psalms, or the Psalter, and the Song of Solomon. All right. Wisdom literature teaches, poetry expresses emotion, ancient poetry contains rhythm of thought rather than sound. So it's about thoughts, not like today where we have these rhymes and it's for the sound of it. So we'll have things that would end in da 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 cat, and then something else, blah, 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 rat, and so it carries that flow where the end part is what's important, but rhythm is not what the Hebrew scriptures are all about. It's about the sound. Okay, so it's about making sure it carries the same essence, and that's why the Hebrew language is very colorful in that light. Psalms are praise, instruction, liturgy, sorrow, and prophecy. They move to temple, synagogue, early church, and today. The Song of Solomon, likely authored by Solomon, it teaches romantic love as a sacred privilege in marriage. All right, so the sections in chapter 9, there are 3 sections, and the first section will give us the background and comparisons with ancient Semitic poetry, introduction to the Hebrew poetry, parallelism, and techniques. The second part, exploring the Psalter, how the Psalms are collected, the Psalms and the worship, and then how to interpret the Psalms. And then lastly is the Song of Solomon, or the Canticles, which means songs, authoring questions and interpreting methods that we're going to be looking at. All right, so let's jump in to section 1, which states that we're going to be looking at the background and comparisons. So it's to describe the devices, structure, and techniques often used in Hebrew poetry, and how these elements were intended to help communicate the meaning of the passage. So, like any language, we have we're living in a changing world, and we communicate through characters, emojis, we communicate through avatars, we communicate through our hand gestures, And even though our languages may be different, there are certain nuances that connects all of humanity. And so therefore the hand gestures and these emojis and it's global. And so if someone wants to say LOL, which means laugh out loud, so you can communicate that to someone in Arabia, and they would understand what it is that you mean when you say LOL, because there's a commonality in language. Now, when we get into the culture itself, it's a whole different precedence. We have nuances. We have the way how we communicate that, how we say a certain word, or how that word is being slurred, or how is it used in a sentence, or how is it communicated within its context. And so all of these things are what makes up the vibrancy of the language, of the speech, how we say what we say. So embedded in the rhythm, cadence, tempo, and even the pronunciations are nuances of meaning familiar to the people who speak that language. So someone coming to Jamaica and for the first time, and not familiar with the Jamaican lingo or the pronunciation of certain words, or how it's being utilized in a context, may get lost. And so it has to be where someone will have to teach that person and show them how to communicate effectively if they want to utilize the patois or the patois. So learning how poetry was constructed and presented in the ancient world gives us an insight into the rhythms and the cadence of ancient peoples. This also helps us catch the subtleties of thoughts and meaning. For example, when we realize the poem about a virtuous woman in Proverbs 31, 10 to 31, which, as you know, Mother's Day is coming up, and I'm sure a lot of churches are going to be using this, is we realize that the virtuous woman is an alphabetical acrostic when you read it in the original Hebrew. Okay, so it's almost saying that we realize that the poet is trying to convey the qualities of a godly woman from A to Z, or from beginning to the end. So the translations of the Hebrew text do not indicate that this important information about the construction of the text. However, if you're familiar with how the text is put together, and understanding the time that it was written in, you get a better understanding, or a feel, a grasp as to what it is that they're trying to convey. And so whenever and this leads into exegesis and homiletics and hermeneutics, when we go to a text and to read that text, sometimes, and this is where we fall short, is that when we look at the text, we're reading it from Western civilization eyes, or from our point of view, or from a Jamaican standpoint, or from a Caribbean outlook. And that is completely wrong, because you won't really find the fullness of what's going on. What you have to do is to sit and listen to those words being spoken as though it was being spoken for the very first time, and then put yourself into the atmosphere of the situation that was going on, so that you are now able to hear the text from that point of view and those particular set of circumstances that was going on. And that's why it's important, whenever we are preaching or whenever we're teaching, that we do background information, give background information as to what was going on in the text, Who was the king at that time? What were the surrounding circumstances that was going on with other nations? What was what was the season that they were in? Was it fall? Was it winter? Was it summer? Was it spring? When we look at all these situations, we get a better understanding of, what was it near a feast day? Was it in a feast day? Was it after a feast day? Was it going towards a feast gathering? And so, because we have to realize that in the Jewish culture, all of their time frames were locked into different feast days. And so we want to find out, whether it was the harvest time, or whether it was what do you call it, the Pentecost, because then that gives light and opens up the text a little bit more to understanding what was really going on. And so, in this setting, we're not going to go deep. This is for when you go into your master's degrees and you are doing hermeneutics, and doing contextual information to see the authenticity of the text, and you're pulling the text apart to see what was going on. Was there some interpretation that was inserted into the text, or stuff like that? So we're not doing that. We're just giving an overview of the Old Testament text. All right. So this study is intended to familiarize you with the basic elements of ancient Semitic poetry. Also, we will notice influences from other cultures, because we got to understand that the Hebrew people did not live in a vacuum. They were real people. They were a real nation. And so therefore they were part of a wider community and other cultures. And so you'll see where there are influences from the other cultures. You'll see where they will utilize material from other cultures. And it's inserted into the biblical texts, because all truth is God's truth. And because God uses various means to convey that truth, it will help us to understand how the inspired biblical text incorporates materials from other cultures. We will encounter similarities of thought, context, cadence, rhythm, and emphasis in the Bible with material from other places. While we confess that the Bible is the only rule of faith and practice, we also, in rudimentary ways, will also recognize that God works in other places too. So sadly, people often don't respond to God's ways, and God's people often don't proclaim the full truth to those who have only partial truth. It goes without saying that Israel was not the only people in the ancient East who possessed a rich store of religious poetry. And particularly, a number of pieces have come down to us from two great centers of civilization, Mesopotamia and those of the Nile. So Mesopotamia would more be like Babylon, and then the Nile is speaking of Egypt. All right. So again, as we are looking at the biblical text, we are looking at the cadences, the familiarity with these thoughts that are written for our insight, in order to understand the truth of God's word. Bullock noted here, nobody has the franchise on truth but God. If one culture comes by means of of natural revelation to share basic ideas of ethical principles with the biblical faith. We are free to recognize that without diminishing the value of and the need for special revelation. All right, but we should also not lose sight of the fact that the biblical writers often had something unique and peculiar to their faith to communicate. It should also be clear that these people felt a compulsion to do so beyond themselves. If we carry the idea of resemblance too far, we might begin giving the impression that biblical writing offer no new, fresh, or inspirational notions, although one could get impressive impressions from certain scholarly writings. All right, so, and then as Bullock noted further, that poetic language may derive vocabulary and illustrations from mythology without embracing its religious systems. And so, again, we are talking about this this cultural mix that goes on, and we even have it in our culture today, where certain things we have utilized in our church services that holds a particular truth and lends itself into the theology of God, and without us embracing the damaging effects or impact of cultural, cultural stuff that's a part of it. So we see that even within our time, all right. They also in this book showed how you'll have several similarities within the text, the biblical text that are also, you can find something similar to it in Babylonian literature there. One being the flood story. This is with the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm not sure if any of you read that, but I remember having to read that. The Epic of Gilgamesh. You have where it's talking about his eternal life and and stuff like that. He's trying to find himself, and he is the champion of all champions, and I think if I remember correctly, he was so infatuated with himself that one day he saw his reflection in the river and was impressed that there was someone just like him, and tried to gather that person together, and eventually drowned himself because it was just a reflection. So that's one of those. So, and you have certain similarities here that they're giving you. You have a different writing styles that are in the text. You have a dirge or lament that was related to funeral songs sung annually at the death of a group's fertility god of vengeance or life. And we see that in Amos 5:16 and Jeremiah 9:16-21. The prophets often called for mourning over the sin of the nation and composed laments for its demise and destruction. So we see where they use a dirge like and or this lament to speak a word over the sin of Israel as they cried for them. Still another influence is in the Hebrew poetry was the royal songs, which was composed to extol kings and Yahweh. The Israelite song of enthronement is indeed dependent as regards to its form on the style of ancient courts, which has the domination of the world in view and suited only for great kings of the East. And we see that in Psalm 2, and Psalm 45, and Psalm 110. So these are about these royal songs is about God coming into his ultimate authority and taking over dominions and kingdoms. That he's not just the king of Israel, but he's the king of the whole world. All right, so now you have another one here is the taunt songs, T-A-U-N-T, taunt songs, which are boastful and defiant tones. These were also popular in ancient times. Goliath's taunt of Israel in 1 Samuel 17 shows this. The prophets also composed taunt songs about Israel's enemies. You have examples of that in Isaiah 23, 14 through 16, and Jeremiah 22, 13 through 17. It's also found in Numbers 21, 27 to 30. It seems to preserve that that idea of taunting, saying, who is like the Lord, stuff like that. Okay. Then you have the battle songs. These are a song of celebration, of victory, and prowess in war. And we would see that when they crossed over the Red Sea in Exodus 15, when Miriam sang her song. We also see a similarity to that in Deborah's song of victory in Judges chapter 5. Okay. We also see one about David when they were singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David kills his tens of thousands. So those were battle songs. Then you have Numbers 21, 14 mentions a collection of war songs. So how do we identify Hebrew poetry? Speaking very generally about the material, we will be examining one must first examine the general designation of Hebrew poetry from a traditional point of view. This material is called the writings. The Greek word used to describe this is hagiographa. Okay. Bullock discusses the traditional place of the songs of the books in the writings, and the writings would include Job, Psalms, and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the songs of Solomon, or the Canticles. Although the material in the writings in Jewish circle is different, the arrangement of the material as we have it now has gone through various transitions depending on the translation of the Bible in focus. All right, so we see here where in our Bible it's divided. So it's not just called the writings, but we see where you'll have wisdom literature. So wisdom literature would include the Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. Those would be considered wisdom literature. So those had its main purpose to teach you how to live life. And then you have the Psalms and the Canticles are generally known as poetic books. Although there are wisdom psalms and songs of Solomon, teaches love through poetry and song. So the Psalms would be about expressing the emotion or the feeling about different situations without necessarily trying to teach you anything. So you'll see where David would be very upset about certain things, and he would express his anger or his frustration in a psalm, and be able to. But he's not really saying that this is the theology or this is what God is planning on doing or stuff like that. And sometimes as we read these psalms, we think that that's what God is going to do to his enemies. No, this is how David was feeling, and so he was expressing his feelings through these psalms when he was saying, God, why don't you strike them down dead? Just wipe out the enemy. These are his feelings. These are, and so he was expressing his feelings in these prayers or songs, but not necessarily is it theology. I hope you understand. If not, just let me know, and we will discuss that. All right. In attempts to define biblical poetry and prose, there is the great difficulty of sifting through conflicting analysis concerning them. On the one hand, a scholar may say there is no one unifying structure in Hebrew poetry, while another scholar may identify several unifying structures. This is disagreement among scholars and resistance of the biblical text to fit any consistent discernible pattern. However, Kugel says if one puts aside the notion of biblical poetry and prose and tries to look afresh at different parts of the Bible to see what it is about them that distinguishes one from another, it will soon be apparent that there are no two modes of utterance. But many different elements which elevate style and provide from formality and strictness of organization. So supposedly poetry is characterized by a definite meter. Okay, so it has a rhythm, has so it carries, if you know anything about music, you have a beat that you have to follow. So you have 2-2 or 4-4. That means at every fourth beat, it's a new thought. Bam 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 bam. So and so you're carrying that thought. You could either have it where it's staccato, where it's moving very fast, and da 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 da. So it has to do with the number of beats and what's being stressed at the end, and so it gives that rhythm. And the rhythm is intended for the listener to have ease of catching the tune, and being able to do that well. Just like again, how our children can listen to these songs on the radio and pick up the tune very quickly because the rhythm was very catchy. And so sometimes without even thinking, they would sing the song, not knowing that they're singing the song, and because they enjoy the beat. So the beat or the rhythm or the rhyme was catchy enough, and so therefore they were able to remember the words. And maybe if our schools could utilize that formation within our learning. Maybe kids will learn a lot better. Anyway, so here is one this is a meter. So you have, it starts out with A and A1, B and B1, and then C. So C would be the middle part. So it says, he has worn out my flesh and my skin, he hath broken my bones. So they're saying the same thing, but in different ways. So he has worn out and he has broken are saying the same thing. My flesh, my bones, and my skin. So he has worn out my flesh and my skin. He hath broken my bones. So this is a lament that is found in Lamentations chapter 3-4, where he is lamenting over the sin of Israel and saying that God has worn out my flesh and my skin. He has broken my bones. So that again, that gives you that thought, because you got to remember that they were pastoral, meaning that they took care of animals and they took care of the sheep. And so when a sheep is gone astray, what the shepherd would do is to break the sheep's leg. And so we see where this is a means of keeping the sheep that's important to you close to yourself. All right. So poetry in the Western culture, that's our time, has consistent rhythm and rhyme. This serves to elevate the thought in a way that makes it more appealing and meaningful. Thus, poetry refers to some kind of sustained rhythm of speech or written text. This has been true throughout history. So let's look at Psalm 19, where it talks about the heavens are telling of the glory of God. Their expanse, the heavens, are declaring, are telling. So the word, you see where it's just picking up, it's an overemphasizing of what's going on. The works or the glory of his hand, whose hand? God's hand. All right, so we have in poetry, we have these parallelisms. And this was an example of a parallel thought, where the heavens are telling the glory of God. Their expanse is declaring the work of his hand. So it's parallel with each other. It's going in the same direction and the same thoughts. All right. And so there are different types of parallelisms. You have the synonymous parallelisms. You have the antithetic parallelism, which refers to contrasting thoughts. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, and here is the contrasting thought, but the way of the wicked shall perish. This is found in Psalm 1. You also have what's called the synthetic parallelism, which refers to the expression of a thought in one line with the corresponding line or lines continuing or extending that thought. All right, so Psalm 1 again, verses 2 and 3, has this idea or this thought where it talks about the righteous shall be like a palm tree, like trees planted by the rivers, and their fruit shall be in their season. So because he meditates on God's law day and night. So it extended that thought about the righteous. Another one is found in Amos 1:7. I will send fire on the wall of Gaza, and it will devour her palaces. So we see where he says he's going to send fire, but then here it goes further to explain, give more emphasis, and it shall devour her palaces. Okay, the third type of is one that many scholars say it's not true parallelism, because nothing is balanced by the sequent lines or thoughts. Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into that part. So that part is really what they call the complete parallelism. All right. So, again, you can look through these parallelisms in your book. All right, let's go into techniques. In review, a line in Hebrew poetry is called a verse, unlike the Romance languages, with verses comprised of several lines. The verse is usually made up of 2 or 3 terms or members, although some might have more. These terms or members are Hebrew words that evoke several words in English translation. The line is called a stike, and 2 lines, which are parallel, are called a distike, and 3 lines are called a tristike, and 4 lines are called a tetrastike. Okay, so these stikes are 4 lines, maybe grouped in strophes or stanzas. Bullock says here it lists some text that seems to indicate strophic structure, but there is no external marking in the biblical text. Then we have another term which I'm sure you have seen a lot in the Psalms. It's called the Selah. It means it's a musical term, and it means to pause or to think about it. Give it some thought. Ruminate on this thought for a little bit before we move forward. So that's what the word Selah means. All right. Okay. I am just going through to see what is really important to emphasize here. Okay. All right. All right, we're right here. The next technique for our study is called anacrusis. This refers to one or more syllables at the beginning of a line of poetry that are regarded as preliminary to and not a part of the metrical pattern. In Hebrew poetry, this usually refers to a unit or word that stands alone at the beginning of the poem or stanza. Robinson says such words are usually comparatively small interjections conjunctions or pronouns. They may have special function in the flow of a verse, for they produce a pause, and by making the reader halt, call attention to and emphasize what follows. Again, it's still explaining that word Selah. Another device is called the word pairs. Word pairs are often used in poetic passages to emphasize for emphasis. Some of the more commonly used pair words, word pairs are hear, H-E-A-R, or give ear. Or we'll see another one, Jacob or Israel, where they will use those interchangeably. Serve, bow down, people, nations, reside, dwell, earth, dust, 1,000, 10,000, enemies, foes. All right, so those are word pairs that are being used. Another one that's being used is the graded numbers. Once, twice, 3, 4 times, 6, 7. You'll find where they will use this idea to emphasize completeness or fullness, sometimes even carrying the idea of overflow or more than enough. So God would speak and say, once I've spoken to you, twice. So it gives that emphasis that this is not the first time I'm talking to you. Or we see where in where they're talking about the deadly sins, there are 7. So it's giving that completeness or that fullness of what's going on. All right, so and you can read those at your leisure. Another device is the onomatopoeia. Okay, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. This means the pronunciation of the word suggests the meaning of the word, or at least the feeling the word conveys. In English, we say the sound of a fly make its buzz, which is supposed to sound like the fly itself. They suggest that in Deuteronomy 32:10, the Hebrew word for howling suggests the raising of one's voice. Okay, so you can read that at your leisure. Okay, we're going to explore the Psalms. I don't think I'm going to read everything that's here, not like I did the first part. What I'll let you know that the Psalms is collection from various writers. It wasn't just David that wrote the Psalms. You had some of the Psalms were from the sons of Korah or Asaph. You have some of them that were written by Solomon. There was a portion that also was written by Moses. The majority, yes, was written by David, but the Psalms are also collection, and they are put in different books. So you have book 1, and then book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. And I believe that in some senses, when they compiled all these Psalms together, they were, in a sense, trying to replicate the Torah. So you have the beginning, Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and it was supposed to reflect that. So we start off with Psalm 1. That would be, you know, equivalent to saying Genesis. And so you see where it talks about the one that fears God, you know, how they are and who they are, and as opposed to the wicked. And so the first book there would start off from Psalm 1 to Psalm 41. So that would end in a doxology to God, then starts again in Psalm 43 to Psalm 83. And then you have from Psalm 84 to 150. And so you hear, you know, you can see through that where you have some that would ascend up to the throne. So those were the ascension psalms. How does one prepare themselves to enter into the house of the Lord? A clean hands and a pure heart. And so they'll be singing those songs as they journey themselves to the house of the Lord. So those were the songs of ascent. And so the Psalms were in preparation for them as they went into the house of the Lord. Here we see the divisions of the book. So again, I was sharing with you that it was divided into 5 books. So we have book 1 is from Psalm 1 through 41. Book 2, Psalm 42 through 72, book 3, 73 to 89, book 4, 90 through 109, and then book 5 is 106, and then book 5 is 107 to 150, which talks about the Psalms. The chief authors of the Psalms in book 1, again, we see it's David. Book 2 is David and Korah. Book 3, Asaph. Book 4, Anonymous, and book 5 is David and anonymous persons. All right, so again, as I said, it was likeness to the Pentateuch. So book 1, it was about Genesis, man and creation. You know, we even read in this one, Psalm 8, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or son of man that you visited him? So we see that. And then every one of them closes with a doxology. So at the end of each one here, we see a praise to God. So Psalm 41:13, Psalm 72:18 and 19, and so on. So yes. So this is when the Psalms were composed during this time. So it's a stretch of time. I believe that most of the songs were put together, especially during the time of the Babylonian captivity, where they structured them into different sections. That's just my thinking. Is as you know, as they were in exile, they did everything to remind themselves of who they are and to whom they belong to. And so, you know, having that in a formation that they could understand, especially for the next generation that was coming up, I believe that would have worked very well. All right, so that is on the Psalms, and again, you can read all of this stuff there. I'm just looking at what is important that I could bring some new light to, rather than reading this thing verbatim. Um, all right, here are some suggested themes for the proclamation of the Psalms. This is, we're starting right here. Bellinger concludes his article with 7 suggested themes for proclamation from the Psalms. The first one is worship. The Psalms are central for any true biblical description of worship. The second one is praise. The praise of God in the Psalms is always substantive praise. It is not a frothy, superficial, shallow sound, but a deep, resonant sound and word, always with the reason behind it, with a reason behind it. The psalm brims with enthusiasm for God and excitement in praising him, and always for substantial reasons. The third suggested theme is the theme of pain. The lament psalms here help here. In many ways, we live in a pain-denying culture. Yes, we live in a pain-denying culture where we take a pill, if our head hurts, or if you're going through stress, take this pill. If you're experiencing some kind of psychological situation, take this pill, make yourself happy. And so it's important. It's an important part of ministry. Is the public claiming and expressing of pain in ways which facilitate the gospel's speaking to it, so that people can and communities are helped in dealing with it constructively. The other suggested theme is the theme of hope. Many Psalms anticipates God's presence and deliverance. Then we see the theme of justice. Many Psalms express the pain and injustice of oppression, as well as God's call for judgment. The other one is about community. We are sometimes a little bit too individualistic, that we've often missed this fact. The Bible, the Hebrew culture was one of community. It wasn't just my individual righteousness or my living right. No. It was the community. Righteousness had nothing to do with individualisms. It had to do with the community. Then we talk about providence, where many Psalms speak of God's provision in various situations. All right. So now we go into the Songs of Song. The Songs of Song, it has been controversial over the years, as people would read it and say, my gosh, how can this be in the Bible? Because of its sexual overture and all that kind of stuff. And so they had a hard time canonizing this in scripture, and so they had to, but it was there undeniably. And so they had to now make sense of it, and realizing the importance of it as time went on. It was stated, I'm not sure if it's authenticity of what I'm about to say, but young men were not allowed to read the Songs of Solomon until they were in their 30s, because of the sexual overture. I wish that we did that more often, where kids would not get access to porn at their early age and distort their minds and stuff like that, but wait until they have grown and are able to decipher what's right and wrong properly. But our society has allowed these situations. So the Songs of Solomon is talking about this love relationship between God and Israel. And it's also about Solomon as he is discussed, or as he is just on speaking about his desire for this woman, and shares his deep inner longings for her. And so yes. All right, I guess that's it. The rest of this you could read on your own. So that's a basic overview, so um again, they would use different interpretations for the Song of Solomon. They may use it as an allegory. They may use it as this is a hypothetical situation. Um, Again, because some may use it as a literal thing. I believe that if you just take it literally and understand that this is about a love that's between a man, a married man and his bride, and the longing for intimacy. Yes, we can use it as God's love for his church. But again, I think that's it. All right, so get ready for self-test 9, and we have 2 more lessons, 10 and 11, and then we will be finished. Yes, sir. All right, until next time, the Lord be with you, and may he bless you abundantly. In Jesus' name, amen.